I never thought an innocent sleepover would change my life. Under the blanket, his hand found mine, firm, older, impossible to mistake. It wasn't just a touch, it was a secret, a forbidden gay love story between two boys of different ages. That single moment of age gap romance became my first real heartbreak. I used to think nights were just for sleeping. Back then, a blanket meant nothing more than warmth, and silence meant peace. But that was before the night he stayed over, before the quiet hum of the ceiling fan became the soundtrack to my confusion, before I learned how dangerous proximity could feel. I was 19, restless, still figuring out who I was. Most of my friends were in college dorms or chasing internships in cities that felt too far away for me to imagine. I stayed behind in my hometown, juggling odd jobs, late-night video games, and a strange sense that I was waiting for something I couldn't name. That something had a name, actually. David. David wasn't my friend. He was my friend's father. 38 years old, broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair that made him look sharper than any man his age should, and a voice that carried authority even in the simplest conversations. He wasn't supposed to be someone I thought about, let alone someone I noticed in ways I couldn't explain. But I did. It started innocently. Summer had just settled in. With days so hot the air conditioning seemed to groan under the weight of it. My best friend Mark asked me to help his dad move some boxes into their garage. I said yes, partly because I needed the money, partly because saying no to Mark always felt impossible. That's when I found myself face to face with David more than I ever expected. The first time I really looked at him, really noticed, was when he lifted a box heavier than it should have been. His shirt clung to his back, damp from sweat, and I remember thinking how strange it felt to notice. It wasn't like seeing some actor on TV or scrolling past an image online. This was real, immediate, and wrong. He was older. He was my best friend's dad. He wasn't supposed to exist in my head that way. I shook it off, or at least I tried. But the weeks blurred into a strange pattern. Mark was gone most evenings. His summer job kept him late. But David would be home. Sometimes he'd ask me to stay after helping with boxes, just to share dinner or cool off with a drink. At first, I told myself it was just kindness, an older man looking out for the kid who hung around his house. But somewhere in that easy rhythm, I started craving those moments. He'd ask about my plans, my frustrations, the things my parents never bothered to ask. And I'd answer, watching his eyes narrow thoughtfully or his laugh break into a room like something I wanted to bottle. I never admitted it to anyone, not even myself, not out loud, but I started to feel safer in his presence than anywhere else. It was confusing, dangerous, a comfort laced with something that felt suspiciously close to desire. One evening, after dinner, Mark's shift ran late again. David and I sat in the living room, the sound of the television low, barely filling the air. He leaned back in the armchair, his long legs stretched out, and I sat curled into the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone. My eyes flicked to him more than they should have. The light caught the edges of his jawline, and I found myself studying the way he rested his hand against his chin, lost in thought. And then he looked up. Our eyes locked for a second too long. Long enough for my chest to tighten, long enough for me to look away first. My pulse stuttered, and suddenly the room felt hotter than it was. He cleared his throat and changed the channel. Nothing happened, technically, but everything had shifted, quietly, invisibly, like a thread pulling taut. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the moment in my head, over and over, until it wasn't just a glance anymore, but an entire possibility I had no right to imagine. The next time I went over, Mark was gone again. David mentioned casually that the guest room AC wasn't working, and if I ever stayed over, I'd be more comfortable in the living room where it was cooler. I laughed it off, saying I never crashed at friends' houses anymore. I didn't add the part about how dangerous it felt to imagine falling asleep under the same roof. But life has a way of arranging things for you. A week later, my parents left town unexpectedly, and our house felt lonelier than I could handle. Mark invited me to crash at his place. By the time I arrived, he had already fallen asleep upstairs, exhausted from his shift, which left me downstairs with David. We stayed up later than I expected. The TV flickered in the corner, forgotten, as we talked about everything from movies to regrets. At some point, he pulled out a blanket, tossed it across the couch, and told me I'd be more comfortable if I stayed there. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just being polite. But when he walked past me, brushing against my shoulder in that small living room, the air seemed to charge with something unspoken. I slid under the blanket, telling myself it was just sleep, just a couch, just another night. But lying there, staring at the ceiling, the sound of his footsteps upstairs fading into silence, I couldn't shake the thought. I wasn't just sleeping in someone else's house. I was stepping into something I couldn't control, something that scared me even as it thrilled me. And I had no idea how close I was to the moment that would change everything. I told myself the first night was harmless. I was just staying over at my best friend's place because my parents were gone. That was it. Nothing more. But the mind has a way of twisting reality, especially when you're 19, restless, and suddenly seeing things you shouldn't. The morning after, I woke up tangled in the blanket David had given me. Sunlight spilled to the curtains, warm and almost too bright, as if it was exposing something I want to keep hidden. I heard clattering in the kitchen, the sound of a pan meeting the stove, and when I stumbled in, David was already there, cooking eggs like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Morning," he said, glancing up. His voice carried the roughness of someone who hadn't had their coffee yet. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, and for some reason, that was the moment my chest tightened, because plain clothes on him didn't feel plain at all. "Morning," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes, trying not to look like I had been overthinking every second of the night before. He slid a plate in front of me without asking, just a quiet gesture that carried more weight than I wanted to admit. Nobody ever did that for me at home. Nobody thought to. And maybe that was why it got to me, why it stayed with me all day even after I left their house. From that morning on, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every time I came over, I noticed little things. The way his laugh would rumble low in his chest, how his hands looked steady even when he was tired, how he listened, actually listened when I spoke. He asked questions that made me feel like my answers mattered. It should have been fatherly. Harmless, but it wasn't. It wasn't at all. I think he noticed me watching sometimes. Not in an obvious way, but in the way his eyes would flick to mine mid-conversation, holding for a second longer than they should, before he cleared his throat or changed the subject. And every time my stomach flipped. One evening, Mark was upstairs again, gaming with headphones on. I stayed downstairs with David, both of us pretending to watch a movie. The living room glowed faintly with the television, but it wasn't a movie I was paying attention to. I felt his presence beside me, the space between us smaller than it should have been. At one point, our hands brushed on the couch. Just a quick graze, accidental, nothing to it. But my entire body reacted. A sharp intake of breath I tried to disguise as a cough. He didn't move his hand right away, though, for half a second. It lingered, long enough for me to wonder, long enough for me to panic. I shifted, putting distance between us, pretending I needed to grab my drink. When I sat back down, he had his arms crossed, eyes fixed firmly on the screen, like nothing had happened. But my mind screamed otherwise. That night, lie in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the touch, convinced I was imagining things. Was it really an accident, or was it a test? Days passed, but my thoughts didn't quiet. If anything, they grew louder. One afternoon, I helped David carry groceries in. Mark wasn't home yet. As I set the bags down, David offered me a beer. I hesitated. 19 wasn't 21, but he just smirked and said, "Don't worry, I won't tell." I laughed nervously, cracked the can, and took a sip. The taste was bitter, sharp, but the weight of sharing it with him dulled everything else. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence strangely comfortable. "You thinking about college?" he asked, eyes steady on me. "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "I don't know. Everyone else seems to have it figured out. I feel like I'm just floating." He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Floating's not the worst thing. You'll figure it out. Just don't rush into being someone you're not." The words sank deeper than I wanted them to. I wondered if he knew, if he saw the way I avoided talking about dating, the way I hesitated whenever girls came up in conversation. If he noticed how I seemed more comfortable in his company than anyone my own age. That night, Mark begged me to crash again. His parents were out of town for the weekend, and he didn't want the house too quiet. I agreed, though I knew it wasn't Mark I was really saying yes to. By midnight, Mark had fallen asleep upstairs, leaving the downstairs silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I sat on the couch with David, both of us under separate blankets, pretending to watch whatever late-night show was playing. At some point, I shifted, pulling my blanket tighter. He looked over, the corner of his mouth twitching, as though he found my fidgeting amusing. "You cold?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. He nodded, then, almost casually, he stretched his blanket and draped part of it across me too. It was such a small gesture, ordinary, even, but the moment the warmth of his blanket touched mine, my chest constricted, because it wasn't just fabric covering me. It was him, his space bleeding into mine, his presence pressing closer. I froze. My heart thudded too loudly, and I was terrified he could hear it. We didn't move after that. The television played on, ignored. The room was too quiet, too charged. And though nothing happened that night, I knew something had shifted again. The air between us wasn't just heavy, it was alive. Later, as I lay on the couch pretending to sleep, I felt the faintest brush against my hand under the blanket. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was me imagining things again. But my hand burned where it had happened, and I kept my eyes shut, breathing carefully, afraid to give myself away. That was when I knew this wasn't in my head anymore. Something was building. Something neither of us could keep ignoring much longer. And part of me was terrified. The other part, it wanted more. The next few weeks blurred together, though not in the way summers usually did. Time didn't feel lazy or slow anymore. Instead, every visit to Mark's house, every glance across the room, every quiet exchange with David felt like a clock ticking towards something I couldn't name. Mark remained blissfully unaware. He carried on with his late-night shifts, his video game marathons, and his endless stories about girls he wanted to ask out. Whenever I was around, he would dump his worries on me, laugh at my half-hearted advice, then disappear upstairs to call someone or play until dawn. And there I'd be, left in the living room with his father. Sometimes we spoke, other times we didn't. But even in the silence, there was an energy I couldn't ignore. It was in the way he stretched across the armchair, relaxed but watchful. The way his eyes lingered when he thought I wasn't looking. The way my pulse raced when he moved too close. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that the weight in the air was only in my head. But then there would be moments, little dangerous moments, that told me otherwise. Like the night he handed me a drink and his fingers brushed mine deliberately, holding just a second longer than necessary. Or when he complimented the shirt I was wearing, saying, "That color suits you," his gaze steady in a way that made me swallow hard. It was all so subtle, small enough to dismiss if I needed to, but I didn't dismiss it. I couldn't. One evening, I came over after a long day of work, exhausted and sweaty. Mark was still at his shift, but David was in the kitchen. He handed me a cold glass of water without asking, like he had been waiting for me. I muttered a thanks, and he studied me for a moment before saying, "Rough day?" "Yeah," I admitted, "just tired." He nodded, then did something strange. He reached out, almost casually, and brushed a damp strand of hair off my forehead. My entire body froze. It was such a simple gesture, but it wasn't one I was used to. Not from my own father, not from anyone really. The touch lingered for only a second before he pulled his hand back, but I couldn't shake the feeling. "Go wash up," he said, his tone steady. "You'll feel better." I did as he said, though not because I needed a shower. I needed space. Space to breathe. Space to remind myself that this was dangerous, that I was 19 and he was 38, and that nothing good could come away my stomach flipped when he looked at me. But when I came back, clean and dressed in borrowed sweats, I caught his eyes lingering again. Not long, just enough. And I knew then he felt it too. A few nights later, Mark begged me to stay again. "It's just one night," he said. Don't make me sit here alone with Dad, all boring and stuff." He laughed as he said it, but my stomach twisted anyway. He had no idea how complicated boring had become. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Mark knocked out early upstairs, leaving me downstairs with David again. We watched some late-night documentary neither of us really cared about. I shifted on the couch, pulling the blanket higher, and he mirrored the movement in his chair. It should have felt ordinary, but it didn't. The room was dim, lit only by the soft flicker of the TV. My heart raced as I tried to keep my breathing steady. Every second. I was hyper-aware of him. The way his chest rose and fell, the sound of him shifting in his seat, the occasional glance in my direction. At some point, he moved. I don't know why. Maybe the chair was uncomfortable. Maybe he just wanted to stretch. But suddenly, he was sitting beside me on the couch. Close. Too close. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked casually, though the question was pointless. He was already lowering himself down. I shook my head quickly. "No, it's fine." It wasn't fine. My skin buzzed. My body was alive in a way that scared me. We sat like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching images flicker across the screen without really seeing them. My blanket slipped slightly and I pulled it tighter, trying to cover my nerves as much as a chill. Then it happened again, that almost innocent gesture. His blanket shifted, brushing against mine. And for a heartbeat, I thought about pulling away. But I didn't. I stayed frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what it meant to let that space between us dissolve. Minutes dragged on like hours. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the electricity in the small overlap of fabric, in the way our arms nearly touched under the shared warmth. And then his hand moved. At first, it was subtle. A shift, a brush, nothing definite. But then his fingers brushed against mine under blanket. Not an accident. Not this time. I stiffened, breath caught in my throat. My heart thundered in my ears as his fingers lingered, almost daring me to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. The world had shrunk to that one point of contact, that one forbidden touch in the dark. He didn't grab my hand that night. Not yet. But I felt the possibility hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. And lying awake later, staring at the ceiling in the quiet dark, I knew it was only a matter of time. Something was going to happen. The only question was when. The night it finally happened didn't begin like anything special. It was late, maybe just past midnight, and Mark had already gone upstairs after another long evening of games. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of the television. I was stretched out on the couch, the same blanket pulled over me that I had used countless times before. And then David came in. He wasn't dressed the way he usually was. No button-up shirt, no crisp lines. Just a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, like he'd given up on pretending to be in control. Something about that looseness made me even more aware of him. "You still awake?" he asked quietly, though he knew the answer. "Yeah," I murmured, shifting under the blanket. "Can't sleep." He gave a small smile, then lowered himself onto the couch beside me. The same spot where he had sat before, dangerously close, almost too close. The fabric dipped with his weight, and I could feel the warmth of his body radiating in the dark. We didn't talk much. The TV droned on about something unimportant, but neither of us cared. Silence stretched, heavy and thick, broken only by the sound of our breathing. I tried to focus on the screen, but every nerve in my body was tuned to him. And then it happened. At first, it was the smallest movement. His hand shifted under the blanket, brushing mine. I froze, pulse hammering, telling myself it was an accident. But it wasn't, because instead of pulling away, his fingers lingered. And then, slowly, deliberately, his hand slid into mine. My breath caught. He didn't grip too tightly, but there was nothing uncertain about it either. His hand was firm, steady, warm, an older hand, a hand that had done and seen more than mine ever had. I should have pulled away. I knew that. Every rational part of me screamed that this was wrong, that this was crossing a line we couldn't uncross. But my body didn't listen. I stayed still. I let him hold me. The room seemed to shrink, as if the world outside no longer existed. It was just the two of us, hidden under the blanket, bound together by something neither of us dared to name. "You're shaking," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "I know." He squeezed my hand gently, not enough to hurt, just enough to say he knew too, that he felt the same electricity, the same fear, the same impossible pull. For a long moment, we sat like that. His thumb brushed against my knuckles, a slow, rhythmic movement that made my skin burn. I couldn't look at him, couldn't risk meeting his eyes. If I did, I knew something inside me would break. Finally, I whispered the only words I could find. "We shouldn't." "I know," he said, voice low, steady. But he didn't let go. The minutes stretched into something unbearable. I don't know how long we sat there, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 50. Every second felt like borrowed time, like someone might come downstairs at any moment and find us. The thought terrified me, but it also thrilled me. And that was the part one couldn't admit, not even to myself. The truth was, I didn't want him to let go. I didn't want the moment to end. At some point, I dared to glance at him. His eyes weren't on the TV. They were on me, studying me, waiting for something I wasn't sure I could give. "David," I started, but the words dissolved in my throat. He leaned closer, just slightly, just enough that I could feel his breath when he whispered back, "Tell me to stop." The words hung heavy in the air. A challenge, a plea, an escape route, but I couldn't take it. I didn't tell him to stop. Instead, I looked away, my silence giving him the answer he already knew. His hand tightened just a fraction, grounding me and undoing me all at once. The rest of the night passed in a haze. We didn't say much after that. We didn't move beyond holding hands. But that was enough. More than enough. Because every second we stayed like that was proof that the boundary between us had shattered. When he finally let go, it wasn't out of guilt or hesitation. It was because the sound of footsteps creaked above us, Mark shifting in his bed. The reminder of his presence cut through the silence like a blade. David pulled his hand back slowly, almost reluctantly. My skin tingled with the absence, like something had been carved out of me. Neither of us spoke. We just stared at the TV, pretending nothing had happened, pretending the blanket hadn't hidden something we couldn't admit out loud. But when I finally lay awake on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew everything had changed. There was no going back, no erasing the feel of his hand around mine, the weight of his voice asking me to stop, the fact that I hadn't, the thrill of it warred with the shame until I didn't know what to feel anymore. All I knew was that I wanted it again, and that terrified me more than anything. The morning after, I tried to act normal. I really did. I woke up early, stretched on the couch as sunlight poured in, and for a moment I convinced myself that nothing had happened, that the warmth I still felt in my hand was just a dream. But then David walked into the room, and one look at him shattered the illusion. He was dressed for work, shirt tucked in, hair neatly combed, every bit the responsible father. But when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker, a flash of recognition. He knew what we'd done, and he knew I remembered too. "Sleep okay?" he asked casually. I nodded, voice catching in my throat. "Yeah, fine." His gaze lingered a second longer than necessary before he picked up his keys and left for the day. But that single second was enough to undo me, because it told me the truth. Last night wasn't nothing. It wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something we both understood, even if we'd never say it aloud. The next few days were torture. Whenever I visited, I couldn't help replaying the moment under the blanket, the way his hand felt around mine, the weight of his breath when he whispered, "Tell me to stop." I carried it like a secret carved into my skin, invisible to everyone but me. Around Mark, I tried to laugh, to eat, to play the role of the carefree friend. But inside, I was restless, because the more I tried to bury it, the stronger it grew. And David, he didn't make it easier. It wasn't obvious. It was never obvious. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when our eyes met and something unspoken passed between us. A look too long, a pause too heavy, a brush of his shoulder when we passed in the hallway. One evening, it all came to a head. Mark had gone out with friends, leaving me alone in the house with David. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different now. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water when he walked in. Our eyes met, and for a moment neither of us moved. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately." I shrugged, just tired. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter. "It's not just that." The words made my stomach drop. He knew. He could see through me as easily as if I were made of glass. My voice faltered. I wanted to deny it, to pretend everything was fine, but the truth was burning in my chest. I don't know what to say. His expression softened, but there was still a sharpness in his eyes. "Then don't say anything." And with that, he reached out, not like before, hidden under a blanket. This time, his hand brushed mine openly, fingertips grazing my skin before curling gently around it. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a shiver through me all the same. "David," I whispered, barely breathing his name. He looked at me, steady, unflinching. "You don't have to be afraid." But I was afraid, terrified, even, because the moment felt so fragile, so intoxicating, and so wrong, that I knew one wrong move could destroy everything. That night, Mark came home earlier than expected. The sound of the door unlocking jolted us apart like lightning. David dropped my hand instantly, and I stumbled back, glass trembling in my grip. Mark walked in, oblivious, chatting about his night. I forced a smile, my heart still racing, while David slipped upstairs without another word. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop replaying it. How close we'd come. How close we always seemed to come. And beneath the fear was something worse. Desire. Because deep down, I didn't want it to stop. I wanted more. A few nights later, the tension finally boiled over again. Mark was upstairs, asleep this time, and I was sprawled on a couch under the blanket. David entered the room quietly, as though testing whether I would acknowledge him. I did, our eyes locking in the flicker of the TV light. He sat down beside me, close enough that the air between us seemed to hum. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, softly, he said, "That night under the blanket." I held my breath. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart thundered in my chest. Me neither. The confession hung in the air, dangerous and undeniable. We were both exposed now, no longer hiding behind silence or stolen glances. David leaned in slightly, just enough for me to feel the heat radiating off his body. "You know this isn't supposed to happen." "I know," I whispered. "Then why?" His words trailed off, but I knew what he meant. Why hadn't I stopped him? Why didn't I want to? I swallowed hard. Because I don't want it to stop. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. Terrifying, exhilarating, impossible to take back. For a moment, his face softened, almost pained. Then he reached out, sliding his hand beneath the blanket again, just like before. Only this time, there was no hesitation. His fingers laced tightly with mine, holding on as though letting go would break him. The silence was deafening. My pulse roared in my ears as the weight of what we were doing settled over us. And then, footsteps. Mark again. This time just stirring upstairs, not coming down. But it was enough to jolt us back to reality. We dropped each other's hands, the moment shattering like glass. But it was too late. The damage was done. We'd crossed a line, and we both knew it. That night, lie awake in the dark, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't going away. The glances, the touches, the secrets, they were piling up, building into something neither of us could contain. And sooner or later, it was going to explode. By the third week, it felt like we were living inside a secret. Every visit to Mark's house had become unbearable in its intensity. The ordinary rhythms of friendship, movies, pizza boxes, video games still happened, but beneath them was something far more dangerous. Every laugh of Mark was hollow, because all I could think about was the silence that followed when he left the room. Every time I climbed the stairs to grab something, I wondered if David's eyes were following me, if he was waiting for me to come back. It was exhausting. It was intoxicating. It was slowly consuming me. One night, the tension finally broke. Mark had fallen asleep upstairs, a movie marathon wearing him out. I stayed downstairs, restless, scrolling through my phone but not really seeing the screen. And then David appeared. He didn't say anything at first, just walked into the room and sat down beside me on the couch. My chest tightened instantly, the air between us electric, suffocating. "You're up late," he said quietly. I gave a short laugh. "So are you?" For a moment, that was all. Just two people acknowledging each other in the dead of night. But then his gaze shifted, deeper, unmistakable. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You know why." His voice was low, steady, but there was something raw underneath. "You know what this is." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Do you?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Every time I tell myself to stop, I can't. The words hit me like confession I'd been waiting for, but was terrified to hear. My hands trembled in my lap. I wanted to say something, anything, but before I could, he leaned closer. Not much, just a few inches, but enough that I could feel the heat of his body, the edge of his breath brushing my skin. My pulse skyrocketed. My mind screamed no, but my body whispered yes. And then it happened. His hand, sliding under the blanket again, finding mine in the dark. Only this time, he didn't just hold it. He squeezed tighter, his thumb brushing over my skin in a way that made me shiver. "David," I whispered, but the word came out broken. His eyes searched mine. "Tell me to stop." But I didn't. Just like before, I couldn't. The silence between us cracked. His face moved closer. Inches now, only inches. The world shrank until there was nothing but his breath and the unbearable weight of the moment. And then, footsteps. We froze. Both of us. My stomach dropped as the sound of movement creaked above us. Mark was stirring again, maybe go to the bathroom. David pulled back instantly, our hands tearing apart as if they'd never touched. We sat rigid, staring straight ahead, pretending nothing had happened while the sound of footsteps passed overhead. Only when the house settled again did either of us breathe. I should have left right then, packed up my things, gone home, and never come back. But instead I stayed. Stayed because I couldn't walk away, even though I knew I should. The tension was unbearable now, a storm waiting to break. The next day, I couldn't look at Mark without guilt clawing at me. He laughed, joked, threw chips at me while we played games, and I forced myself to laugh back. But every smile felt heavy, every glance toward his father a knife twisting deeper. Because now, it wasn't just a hand under blanket. It was almost a kiss. And I knew it was only a matter of time before we crossed that final line. 2 nights later, it almost happened again. Mark had left to stay at a friend's house, leaving me alone with David entirely. I should have declined. I should have gone home. But instead, I stayed, telling myself it was easier, more convenient, less complicated. It wasn't. We sat in the living room, the TV flickering between us. My chest ached with anticipation, fear, longing. Finally, David spoke. "Do you regret it?" The question made my breath hitch. "What?" "Under the blanket, the things we've done." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Do you?" His silence was answer enough. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I don't regret it." That broke something. I saw it in his eyes, the wall between us crumbling, the restraint he'd been clinging to slipping away. He leaned closer again, so close I could smell the faint trace of his cologne. His hand brushed mine, then slid up my arm slowly, deliberately. My skin burned under his touch. And then, finally, his face hovered only inches from mine. My breath caught. My lips parted. But just before it happened, before the kiss we'd been circling for weeks, he pulled back suddenly, standing up, running a hand through his hair. "This is wrong," he muttered, pacing. "You're too young. He stopped himself, shaking his head. "We can't." The words should have been a relief. Instead, they shattered me. "Then why do you keep doing it?" I demanded, my voice trembling. His eyes met mine, raw, exposed. "Because I can't stop." The silence after that was unbearable. We stood on opposite sides of the room, Two people caught between desire and shame, knowing exactly where this was leading but too afraid to admit it. And as I lay awake that night, I realized there was no undoing it. We were past the point of no return. Sooner or later, the moment we'd been circling would happen. And when it did, everything would change. The night it happened, the air itself felt restless. A storm rolled outside, rain drumming hard against the windows, thunder cracking like a warning. Mark had gone out with friends and texted that he'd be staying over at someone's house. For the first time, it was just David and me, no risk of footsteps, no upstairs presence. That should have made it easier to breathe. Instead, it made the air heavier. We sat on the couch, a movie flickering in the background, but neither of us was watching. My chest was tight, my palms damp. Every minute that passed only thickened the tension between us. Finally, David broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." The words cut through me. "Then why'd you let me stay?" He looked at me, his jaw tight, eyes dark with something he couldn't name. "Because I can't tell you to leave." The storm outside thundered again, rattling the walls. Inside, it was silent except for our breathing. I shifted under the blanket, heart racing, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "I don't want to leave." That shattered him. He turned toward me, no longer pretending, no longer holding back. His hand slid under the blanket, finding mine, gripping tighter than ever before. His other hand trembled slightly as it brushed against my arm, then my jaw, tilting my face toward his. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, the same words he had spoken before. But I didn't. I couldn't. My silence gave him permission. And then, for the first time, his lips found mine. The kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't rushed or desperate or violent. It was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. His lips pressed against mine with a careful intensity, as though he knew how fragile the moment was, how easily it could break. But once it began, it consumed me. My hands clutched at the blanket, my chest heaving as his mouth moved against mine. Every nerve in my body screamed with sensation, a mixture of terror and ecstasy, so sharp it almost hurt. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. His breath was shaky. "We shouldn't." "I know," I whispered, "but I don't care." That was all it took. The dam broke. He kissed me again, harder this time, his hand cradling the back of my neck. I melted into him, my body betraying every ounce of fear, every thought of consequence. It didn't matter that he was older. It didn't matter that he was Mark's father. In that moment, it was just us, two people who had fought against this pull for too long and finally given in. The storm outside raged, rain pounding against the house. But inside, the world had narrowed to the heat of his mouth, the strength of his hands, the way time itself seemed to stop. Eventually, the kiss slowed, breaking into silence again. But the silence wasn't empty this time. It was heavy, alive. David pulled back slightly, his hand still on my jaw, his eyes burning into mine. "Do you understand what this means?" I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "Yeah." "It can't happen again," he said. But even as he said it, his thumb brushed across my cheek like he couldn't let go. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we could stop here. That one stolen kiss would be enough. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wouldn't. We'd crossed the line, and there was no going back. And the worst part? I didn't want to go back. The rest of the night was a blur. We didn't kiss again, but we didn't need to. The kiss already lived in my blood, searing itself into my memory, changing everything between us. When I finally went to sleep on the couch, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, the way his lips had felt, the sound of his voice, the storm outside echoing the storm inside me. And though I knew the guilt would come in the morning, that the weight of what we had done would crush me eventually, I couldn't feel it yet. All I felt was him. The next morning was unbearable. David avoided my eyes at breakfast, moving around the kitchen with a forced calmness that only made things worse. Mark had come home cheerful, chatting about his night, completely oblivious to the fire smoldering between his father and me. I laughed when I was supposed to, ate when I was supposed to, pretended everything was normal. But underneath, I was buzzing with a secret I couldn't tell, a kiss I couldn't erase. Every time David glanced at me, even for a second, my chest tightened, because I knew he remembered too. And though neither of us said a word, one truth echoed louder than the storm that night. This was only the beginning. The kiss had happened. It was no longer a fantasy or a stolen glance, but something real, undeniable, etched into my skin. And as much as I wanted to relive it, to cling to it like the most dangerous treasure, the morning after was a battlefield of silence. David barely spoke. He stood by the sink, pouring coffee into a mug as though his life depended on emotion. His jaw was stiff, his shoulders rigid, his every movement controlled with military precision. Mark sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, humming to himself, unaware of the war taking place across the kitchen. I sipped my juice, pretending I wasn't remembering the way David's lips had pressed against mine. Pretending I didn't feel his gaze dart toward me for a fraction of a second before snapping away again. Pretending I wasn't still burning. When Mark got up to grab something from his room, the silence broke. David's voice was low, sharp, trembling with control. Last night never happened. I froze, my throat tightening. You really think we can erase it? His eyes finally met mine. There was no softness now, only fire. We have to. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I didn't care, that I didn't want to pretend. But the way his hands gripped the counter, knuckles white, stopped me. He was terrified, not of me, but of what this meant, of who he was becoming, of what could happen if anyone found out. The sound of footsteps saved us. Mark reappeared, and just like that, David slipped his mask back on, sipping his coffee like nothing had been said. But I heard him, and I hated that he might be right. The next week was unbearable. Every time I was at their house, the air was electric with unspoken tension. David avoided being alone with me, but life has a cruel way of forcing us together, passing each other in the hallway, sitting side by side on the couch while Mark went to the kitchen, his hand brushing mine accidentally when he handed me a plate. Every small moment was louder than words. One night, Mark invited me over for another movie. He fell asleep halfway through, his head tilted back, snoring softly. The glow of the TV cast shadows across the room. David sat in the armchair, silent, pretending to scroll on his phone. I couldn't take it anymore. I shifted on the couch, pulling the blanket tighter, and whispered, "Are you really going to act like nothing happened?" David's head snapped up, his eyes locking on mine. He glanced at his son. "Still asleep?" Then back at me. "Lower your voice." "You kissed me," I hissed. "You touched me. Don't tell me that was nothing." He dropped his phone on the side table, his face caught between anger and desperation. "Do you understand what's at stake here? I could lose everything. My son, my reputation. You don't get it. Then why did you do it?" My chest was heaving, my voice cracking. "Why me?" For a long time, he didn't answer. His fist tightened, loosened, tightened again. Finally, he whispered, because I couldn't stop myself. The words crashed into me like a tidal wave. For the first time, the truth wasn't hidden behind fear. It was raw, stripped bare. Before I could respond, Mark stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. Both of us froze, hearts racing, waiting for him to wake. But he didn't. The room fell silent again, except for the pounding of my heart. David leaned forward slightly, his voice barely audible. "Go home." And I did, but the words he left me with echoed in my skull all night, because I couldn't stop myself. The real danger came a few days later. Mark had invited a couple friends over, and the living room was buzzing with noise, laughter, music, energy. I tried to act normal, but every time David walked through the room, my eyes followed him. Every time his hand brushed against the counter, I remembered it on my skin. At one point, I slipped away to the kitchen for a drink. A moment later, David walked in, stopping dead when he saw me. For a second, we just stared at each other, the noise of the others muffled by walls. "You need to stop looking at me like that," he muttered, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Like what?" I challenged. "Like you know me." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the calm he tried to project. Before I could reply, One of Mark's friends appeared in the doorway. "Hey, you guys coming?" David straightened instantly, his voice steady now. "Yeah, we'll be right there." The friend walked away. I held my breath. For a heartbeat, David stayed where he was, staring at me with eyes that begged and warned at the same time. Then he left, just as quickly. That was the closest we'd come to being caught, and it shook me to my core. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I lingered as usual. Mark had disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone again with David. He stood by the window, staring into the darkness outside. His shoulders sagged, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I don't know how much longer we can do this," he said finally, his voice raw. "Then don't stop," I whispered. "I don't care if it's wrong. I don't care if it's dangerous. I want you." He turned, his face shadowed, torn between hunger and regret. His footsteps were heavy as he crossed the room, stopping only inches from me. His hand hovered at my side, trembling, before finally gripping the edge of the blanket draped over me. He pulled it tighter around me, like he was shielding me, and whispered, "You have no idea what you're asking for." "I do." My voice cracked, and I still want it. The silence that followed was unbearable. The storm from that first night felt like it had returned, except this time it was inside us. Then, with a strangled sound, David pressed his lips to mine again, desperate, hungry, a man losing the battle he'd sworn to fight. I kissed him back with everything I had, knowing full well that once again, we'd cross a line that could never be uncrossed. And this time, neither of us pulled away. Some moments can't be undone. That night, the second kiss, the desperate way his lips claimed mine, it became the line neither of us could ever step back from. But life has a cruel way of reminding you of boundaries. The next day, David avoided me again, pretending nothing had changed. He laughed at Mark's jokes, fixed a squeaky hinge on the kitchen door, asked me if I wanted more coffee, like the man who had kissed me breathless didn't exist. I understood why. The risk was too great. He was older, a father, a man who had built a life. I was just me, the boy who wanted him, who loved him, who saw something fragile behind the armor he wore every day. We never talked about it again. Not really. There were glances, quiet moments, nights when our hands brushed under the table, and we froze like time itself had stopped. But there was never another kiss. Years later, I still think about that stormy night, and the way his hand found mine under the blanket, about the danger, the thrill, the heartbreak. And I wonder if he does too, because some secrets don't fade. They live inside you, not as regrets, but as scars you touch when you need to remember you were alive, even for just a moment. And for me, David will always be that scar, that story I can't tell out loud, except here. If this story touched you, drop one word in the comments that describes how you feel. Heartbroken, seen, confused, exposed. This was more than just a gay love story. It was about a forbidden romance, an age gap connection, and the kind of secret love that leaves scars. Have you ever felt something you couldn't admit out loud? Share your own LGBTQ story below. Even a sentence. Someone reading might feel less alone. Your words matter more than you think.